Fried. I have a stable job that ensures a good standard of living. My spouse, whom I'll call Jill, works too, though it's not a necessity for our financial health. We have extra cash, our children's education funds are secure, and vacations and retirement are well within our means. We're not extravagantly wealthy, but we're comfortable enough not to hunt for discounts relentlessly. The specifics about our kids, our jobs, our ages, or our residence don't matter for this tale. I don't have a dramatic background like being a former soldier, a tech wizard, a crime syndicate member, or a martial arts expert. My life is pretty ordinary, so mundane details like hobbies, childcare, or school routines are irrelevant here. I am cautious about discussing my children unless it directly affects the narrative. In essence, I stick to the essentials, addressing those who are more focused on physical appearances. Jill is indeed appealing. She's not a showstopper but has a wholesome attractiveness about her and has aged gracefully. At our high school reunion, she stood out positively among her peers. She's maintained her looks over the years. As for me, I'm no heartthrob. I've never been exceptionally handsome, but I was never unappealing either. Now, I'm just an average guy, with a thinning hairline but more body hair than I'd prefer. Despite this, Jill finds comfort in my presence, once telling me how she needed my warm fuzzy embrace after a long day, which made me feel incredibly valued. Physically, I'm in decent shape for my age, with a commendable physique. Our intimate life isn't a focal point here, but for context, Jill and I both had a modest number of relationships before we met, and we explored new territories together. Our shared experiences are balanced, with no standout adventures that the other hasn't shared. What is pertinent to this narrative, however, is that I am known for my reliability and kindness. I'm the person you'd call for help in the wee hours, or for financial aid, which I never expect to be returned. This trait has built my reputation as a dependable nice guy, something that Jill admires and that has never caused strife in our relationship. Jill is colleagues with Susan, who is married to Paul. They're about our age and childless. Paul has a child from a previous relationship, but together, they haven't pursued having children or adoption due to personal preferences. However, these details are tangential to the main story. We had become acquainted with Susan and Paul over the last 2 years. Jill and Susan were close, often referring to each other as besties. Jill mentioned that Susan was bisexual, a detail I found interesting but didn't think much of at the time. I've known gay colleagues, so the concept wasn't foreign to me, though my own attractions lay elsewhere. When Jill shared this, I simply responded, "Huh, how interesting," keeping my thoughts to myself. These thoughts weren't about Jill and Susan together, but rather about Susan with an imaginary bisexual woman, as I was pretty sure Jill wasn't into such adventures, being more traditional in her views on relationships. Jill then mentioned that Susan and Paul had a very open relationship, with the understanding that both would be involved in any extra activities. Wow, was all I could say. I found our friend's arrangement amusing and intriguing. We spent time with Paul and Susan regularly, visiting each other's homes and sharing activities. I genuinely liked them both. They often complimented Jill, and I felt comfortable doing the same with Susan, acknowledging her attractiveness without crossing any lines. Paul was also a good-looking guy, and it was easy to see why others found him appealing. My work rarely required travel, but I attended an annual training seminar. Jill and I kept in touch daily during these trips. One night, however, Jill didn't return my call, which was unusual, but I assumed it was nothing serious. Upon returning home, I noticed Jill acting peculiarly, showing an unusual interest in my trip details. In retrospect, her probing questions coincided with her recounting her week, which included a convenient sleepover for the kids on the same night Jill was unreachable. At the time, I didn't connect the dots, but later it all started to make sense. The signs were subtle, so there wasn't a single moment that tipped me off. It was more about the little things adding up. The next time I saw Paul after his trip, he wrapped me in a big hug and said, "I love you, man." That took me by surprise. He wasn't usually so expressive. It was a one-time thing, but after that, something always felt a bit off during our get-togethers. Our conversations were filled with innuendos that didn't sit right with me. I'm all for a good laugh, but some comments just didn't land. It felt as though I was missing out on an inside joke. And Jill's laughter seemed forced, like she was trying too hard to be polite rather than genuinely finding things amusing. At the time, I brushed it off as her possibly not catching the joke, just like me. Looking back, I realized I was oblivious to my own suspicions, but a seed of doubt had been planted. I wasn't exactly on high alert when Jill mentioned she felt unwell one morning. Without that nagging feeling in the back of my mind, I might have just focused on getting the kids ready for school without giving it a second thought. But she hadn't shown any signs of illness the night before, so her sudden sickness caught my attention. I offered to stay home with her, but she insisted she'd be fine on her own. I could have pressed the issue, but I didn't want to seem overbearing. After all, it's not uncommon for people to suddenly feel under the weather. So, I left for work, promising to check in on her and return home if she needed me. She warned she might be sleeping, but I playfully told her I'd come back to take care of her if that was the case. I was trying to reassure myself as much as her, though I felt guilty for even suspecting anything might be amiss. My drive to work was filled with regret for not addressing my concerns directly. With little more than Paul's unusual affection and Jill's peculiar behavior to go on, my imagination was running wild with all sorts of scenarios. Once at work, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I loved my wife, but I couldn't ignore my doubts. In a state of distress, I called Paul's office, only to find out he had taken a personal day. This revelation only fueled my anxiety. Then, when I reached out to Susan, hoping she might share my concerns or offer some clarity, I learned she was also unavailable. I like to think of myself as a trusting person, not prone to jumping to conclusions. But the coincidence of Paul, Jill, and Susan all being unexpectedly absent from work had me fearing the worst. While part of me hoped for a benign explanation like a surprise party, my mind couldn't help but wander to darker possibilities. My birthday, along with our anniversary and any significant occasion, was still far off. When I found out Susan wasn't present, I approached my boss, explaining that I felt unwell and needed to leave. I must have appeared quite distraught, as she not only concurred but also suggested I might need medical attention. Was it coincidence, fate, or sheer luck? Many things could have turned out differently. I didn't resort to hacking or hiring a detective. There was no dramatic espionage on my part. Instead, I drove to where Paul and Susan lived, noticing Jill's car in their driveway. I parked a bit away and walked to their house, pondering the situation. The door was unlocked, which made me wonder, was it their usual practice, or had they simply forgotten in the moment? They might have been caught up in something, perhaps too distracted to secure the door. I entered the silent house, finding no one in the shared spaces. My heart felt like it was thundering as I moved quietly, eventually hearing voices from the bedroom. The door was shut, leaving me uncertain of the scene inside. The voices weren't hushed, and soon I recognized Jill's among them. I lingered, still clinging to the hope that there might be an innocent explanation. Then, my wife's voice broke the silence with light-hearted words, hinting at a playful secret. Emotions surged, overpowering reason. I longed to interrupt whatever was unfolding. Wondering if she had her phone with her, I checked mine, hands shaking, and sent her a message expressing my concern and asking if I should return. Paul's voice then cut through, anticipating a spectacle, followed by Susan's playful response. Suddenly, there was a pause, and I heard, "Hold on. Oh no, it's Garrett." Yes, she had her phone. "What did he say?" Susan inquired. Jill replied, "He's concerned about me, probably because I said I was feeling ill." Paul remarked, "Just say you're okay. My humor is the best medicine." Susan, recognizing the inappropriateness of the remark, responded, "Paul, stop being obnoxious. Just kidding around." Then Jill added, "I can't just ignore this. Garrett will rush home if I don't reply. I have to send a message." Paul suggested, "You could say you're picking up something from the store." "Enough, just be quiet for a bit." That was my cue to leave. Fortunately, my timing was perfect. I slipped out the front door quietly, closing it behind me as I hurried to where my car was parked. It was more of a brisk walk. My focus was glued to my phone, anxiously awaiting the next message. Holding it, I noticed my hands were slightly trembling. My grip almost failed when her next message arrived. "Darling, I'm okay. Thanks for caring. Going back to sleep." By the time I read it, I was already down the street, well away from the house. I replied succinctly, grateful for predictive text, informed work I'm unwell. Coming home to look after you. At that moment, I figured one of two things would unfold. Either she would hurry back home, or it would signal the end of our marriage. No love, don't bother. Too late, already on my way. Here's an important detail. My journey home from work was longer than her trip from Paul and Susan's. I intended to arrive before her, unbeknownst to her. I felt my lead widening as her text responses lagged compared to mine, probably because she was also conversing with Paul and Susan. "Darling, please, don't leave work. It's settled. On my way. See you soon." Her reply was almost instantaneous. "See you soon." It seemed like she copied and pasted that. This is where you might think of me as spiteful, and to an extent, you wouldn't be completely off the mark, yet it's not the whole story. I pictured the rush of excuses she'd have to concoct to explain her sudden departure to Paul and Susan, and I confess, that thought brought me a fleeting, twisted satisfaction. Fear mingled with curiosity in me. At that moment, I couldn't tell if her actions stemmed from regret or fear. I pondered whether I had interrupted something in the making or uncovered a secret about to unfold, perhaps again. My knowledge was limited, so curiosity got the better of me. I discreetly parked my car on a nearby street, out of her usual line of sight, and made my way to our home. In retrospect, my actions seemed overly secretive, prompting me to question why I felt intrusive in approaching my own residence. Regardless, it felt uncomfortable. Judge me as you see fit. When she arrived, my car was out of sight, not in the garage. From a hidden vantage point, I watched her drive up. I then retreated to our bedroom, closing the door and sitting on the bed, contemplating the rapid sequence of events that would follow her arrival. I anticipated her feigned illness, a ruse to cover her tracks by the time I confronted her. Her footsteps hastened to the bedroom, and upon opening the door, her complexion paled. I remained silent, letting her speak first, curious about the excuses she would concoct. I was mentally prepared to dismantle her fragile justifications. Yet, she offered no excuses. "I'm so sorry," she uttered. I paused before responding, my expression unreadable. But she sensed my awareness of the truth. I probed, "Sorry for what?" "For the incident with Paul and Susan," she confessed. There it was, the confirmation of my worst suspicions. We sat down to discuss the matter, maintaining a noticeable distance between us, not out of anger, but from a newfound emotional gap. My aim was to grasp the full extent of the situation, not from anger but from a need to understand, perhaps hoping it was all a misunderstanding or something more complex like extortion or a covert operation. But it was none of those. Our conversation laid bare all the facts, leaving no room for doubt. My emotions were a whirlwind, indescribable to anyone who hasn't experienced such betrayal. We eventually broached the motive behind her actions. "I did it because I wanted that experience," she explained. "What experience?" I inquired, seeking to comprehend the rationale behind her decision. "The feeling of intimacy with another person. Why didn't you experience this with Susan?" It may sound strange, but having another person involved made it feel allowable. I couldn't go through with it just one-on-one. Why not discuss it with me? Because I was afraid of being judged for having such desires. I wish I could say I understood, but I didn't. My reaction was immediate, and for the first time, I raised my voice. "So, you chose to act secretly rather than face potential judgment from me?" She remained calm despite my outburst, continuing as if she had anticipated or needed to confess. "Yes, it sounds foolish when I say it, but that was my thought process." In my mind, I was baffled. Hasn't the idea of adding someone else been a curiosity for many? I kept that thought to myself, striving to appear composed, which is usually easy for me, but that night it was a challenge. "So, your main interest was in the experience with another woman, and the involvement of another man didn't really factor into your decision?" I managed to say steadily. She paused before answering. The latter was a consideration, but not the primary one. It was all interconnected, but my actions with him were contingent on her presence. Hearing this was jarring, yet I also felt a strange relief. Jill was direct, no mincing words. My mind raced with thoughts, yet her not going further in physical acts seemed significant. I asked, "Do you have regrets?" "Yes, I regret it. I found it enjoyable then, but realizing it hurt you, I wish I could undo it. I'm willing to do anything to make amends." The admission, "I found it enjoyable," was intensely painful. I needed to understand everything. She revealed the details. As I suspected, it had already occurred. My intervention only prevented a recurrence. The knowledge brought mixed feelings. It was just one incident. That had to count for something. I believed she wasn't withholding anything, given her openness so far. She was ready to disclose everything, yet I doubted I wanted to hear all of it. If I admitted it, those memories might haunt me forever. I'm aware of my tendencies. Yet, curiosity got the better of me, and I encouraged her to go on. Jill confessed, "I was curious about the extent of my influence." The revelation left me dazed. At some point, my shaking had ceased, unnoticed. I dreaded the truth, yet part of me needed to hear it. "And, did you find out?" "Indeed, I did." I wish she hadn't sounded so thrilled. "And about that day I walked in on you. Would you have continued?" "Yes." The encounter was brief. It was focused on Susan. "So, had I not walked in, would things have escalated?" Jill hesitated, not out of guilt, but in thought. "Perhaps, it seemed likely." I averted my gaze, burying my face in my hands. "Garrett, I love you. I'll do anything to make this right." "Anything." Her words felt too familiar. "I'll do anything." Yet I doubted. Immediately, she insisted, "I mean it. I truly do." I paused, then flatly remarked, "Would you go as far as hurting them both, if I asked?" It was a rhetorical point. Her expression told me she understood. "No, I wouldn't go that far, but I'm sincere in trying to make amends, short of causing serious harm." I hadn't anticipated such frankness. Jill was being forthright. Despite her omissions, she couldn't disguise her true feelings or intentions. "My struggle is with the thought of another man close to you, my wife. Maybe I could move past it if I'd done something similar, but..." She cut me off. "Yes, absolutely. We can include Susan." Her eagerness caught me off guard. I wasn't entirely serious, but she clung to the idea like a lifeline. "Listen, I'm confident Susan will agree to it. She's always up for a group hangout, and she's promised me one before. It's practically guaranteed." There it was, the moment of truth. I could have backtracked, clarified that my concerns were about more than just the misunderstanding. They were about feeling betrayed. But I didn't. My thoughts were a mess. Part of me wondered if I hadn't been clear enough in our communication. Yes, I actually considered that. I was uneasy, but my actual words were simple, masking the turmoil inside. "I don't want you visiting that house again." "No worries, I'll speak to her at the office on Monday." Come Monday, both of us were at work. My mind was preoccupied, pondering the conversation, questioning my feelings about the whole situation. The only silver lining seemed to be my colleague's concern for my well-being, as I must have looked quite distressed. At least my excuse for being at work seemed believable. Once home, I greeted her with a hug, exchanging our usual pleasantries. Then I inquired about her chat. They weren't keen on the idea. That hit me hard, though not entirely unexpectedly. She didn't cushion the impact. Why not? Paul isn't comfortable with another man around his wife. He's not as open as. I lost it, which is rare for me. Not as open. What made you think I was okay with any of this? That's not what I meant. I don't know why I said that. I pressed on, my guess. You assumed I'd be okay with it, but knew Paul wouldn't be, even before you asked? No, that's not it. I just blurted out the most awful thing. I meant your understanding. Oh no, this is all wrong. I've made a mess, and I can't mend it as I hoped. I don't want to lose you, but I'm at a loss here. Her tears were genuine, not just for show. I've seen her cry over nature documentaries and lost animals. Her emotions were real. I never doubted her fidelity. She's a terrible liar, and if she had been dishonest, I would have noticed. In that moment, I felt a need to console her, drawing her close. Some might call me naive, but after years of marriage, I understand her emotions. She wasn't overacting. Her pain was real. I wanted to soothe her, yet I was also wrestling with my feelings. As she wept quietly against my chest, I softly said, "Okay, I want to move beyond this too." She looked up at me, eyes brimming with tears, yet spoke with conviction. "Anything." I gently wiped her tears, my voice firm. "Don't say anything if you don't truly mean it. My way to deal with this is to seek justice against Paul and Susan. I want their union to crumble, just as they nearly shattered ours. I want them to endure my agony." Unexpectedly, her eyes blazed with determination as she quietly responded, "Oh yes." Her gaze met mine, her expression transformed from sorrow to anger. The swift change was startling. I cautiously asked, "Yes, they misled me, they deceived me. I acknowledge my part in this, but they convinced me it would all be fine. I believed they would help fix my marriage, yet they showed no concern. So, yes, I'm ready." She hesitated, then continued, "They damaged our relationship, and I want them to realize that. I'm willing to do what's necessary to make them feel that." This was new territory for me, constantly adjusting my expectations. I had assumed she would defend her friends, having chosen them over me initially. I was mistaken. Where's the guide for handling this? I was slow to fully believe her shared anger and sincerity, as our reasons differed. However, my view shifted. Stroking her hair, I whispered, "We'll work through this." That night, we embraced tightly in bed, an embrace that felt unusually close. We slept intertwined, reluctant to part. My anger was directed solely at Susan and Paul. By morning, my anger lingered, uncertain if hers did too. Doubts crept in about her sincerity the night before. I rose early, quietly leaving the bed without waking her, a change from her usual early rising. Downstairs, I prepared breakfast, finding solace in the routine of cooking and brewing coffee, grinding the beans myself for its better taste and the strangely satisfying sound, which that day seemed especially poignant. Jill came downstairs, her eyes showing a mix of concern and relief. "You weren't in bed, and I got worried." During breakfast, we exchanged few words, but eventually, we delved into deeper conversation. I initiated, "Did you really mean everything you said last night?" She paused, her fork mid-air, just before diving into her scrambled eggs. "Yes, I did. Is there something specific you're referring to?" "It's about setting things straight," I clarified. "Absolutely," she affirmed. I took a moment, savoring a bite of my breakfast, before laying out the terms. "I need you to make some changes. Actually, let me rephrase that. These are not just requests, they are conditions." She prompted, "Go on." "You'll have to resign from your job and cut off all contact with them. If they reach out to you, I don't want you to engage. Show me any texts, let me hear any voicemails, and tell me if they approach you in person. You leave your job today, no going back to the office. But I need to retrieve some personal items from there, and I'm supposed to give a 2-week notice," she countered. I felt my patience wearing thin, yet I understood the practicality of her concerns. She had personal belongings at work, including family photos and keepsakes. Moreover, I didn't want her to exit her job on negative terms. Trying to maintain my composure, I agreed, "All right, sort it out. And if you encounter Susan, keep me in the loop about what's discussed." She approached me, and with a tender kiss, bridged the distance between us. At first, I was too stunned to react, but then I understood. She comprehended the gravity of the situation. I reciprocated the kiss. "I love you, yet I'm also feeling hurt." "I get it," she acknowledged. "I also need to feel that you still need me. That you could ever doubt my desire for you astonishes me," I confessed. The mere suspicion of all this turmoil showed me how much I feared losing your affection. With a playful yet earnest gesture, Jill tapped her forehead, then lightly tapped mine. "Of course I need you, and that never changed." I responded by embracing her passionately, leaving our untouched breakfast behind. What unfolded was a fervor of intimacy unlike any we'd experienced before, right there in the kitchen. Although not new to exploring every corner of our home, this time was different. For the first time, my focus was solely on my own desires, forsaking her satisfaction, almost hoping she found it lacking. Throughout, she was nothing but encouraging. After the incident, my old reservations, influenced by the adage "a gentleman doesn't kiss and tell," dissipated. Now, I'm inclined to share more than just the bare essentials. I kissed her fervently, not waiting for her usual cues. In the heat of the moment, I tore her clothes, a first for me, driven by sheer impulse rather than concern for material costs. My actions were driven by a raw need for closeness, not the preliminaries. To my surprise, her readiness matched my intensity, prompting a reconsideration of our usual tender approach. Her whispered words of needing punishment struck a chord, fueling my intensity. I had her leaning over the counter and without hesitation, began with firm, resonating slaps that marked her skin. Her reactions only spurred me on, seeking to intensify each subsequent impact. The balance between cathartic release and something darker was blurred as we lost ourselves in the moment. Our physical connection was relentless and fervent, marked by the sounds and intensity of our union. The weekend transformed into a whirlwind of impassioned encounters, each moment fueled by a blend of reclamation and perhaps a quest for atonement on her part. By the end of it, the physical evidence of our intense connection was evident on both of us, with lingering marks and tender reminders. Despite the physical toll, our desire remained unquenched, leading to continued fervor. In hindsight, this intense reconnection might have uncovered a shared, unspoken craving, providing a raw, physical bond that redefined our understanding of each other. Monday came, and it was a terrible day at work. I found myself glued to my phone, eagerly awaiting each notification. Clearly, I wasn't the most focused leader or worker that day. If I were my own boss, I would have given myself a stern warning. Being in a position of authority does have its benefits, but only to an extent. For the following 2 weeks, my behavior was definitely not something I would have accepted from my team. Jill resigned from her job, collected her belongings, and mentioned her limited interaction with Susan. She showed me every message and shared every voicemail, at least to my knowledge. Trust was fragile at this point, even with my strong suspicion. The slightest doubt can be unsettling. Eventually, Susan's messages and calls ceased. Paul, to my knowledge, hadn't reached out to her at all. The real challenge was repairing the relationship between Jill and me and maintaining our family stability. That was our priority. It wasn't simple, but we were both dedicated to it. Gradually, we managed to return to our previous state, which included Jill starting a new job. We completely cut off contact with Paul and Susan and avoided discussing them altogether. Seeking retribution took nearly a year. As the plan for retribution slowly took shape, Jill attempted to make amends and demonstrate her understanding of the gravity of the situation. Life had returned to normal, and she could have just let time heal, but she didn't. She earnestly tried to make things right. However, I struggled with the sincerity of her efforts, wondering if they were driven by remorse, particularly in our intimate moments. Jill brought up a sensitive topic, suggesting she was open to exploring new experiences together to mend things, but I questioned the feasibility and her network for such an endeavor. Her lack of specific suggestions was a relief to me, and despite my reservations, I chose to believe in her sincerity. Discovering the betrayal initially left me yearning for resolution and repentance, desiring to feel united as a couple again. After rejecting her proposal, it didn't take long for me to feel reassured about our relationship. Some might call me naive, and I wouldn't be surprised, as I've hinted at this before. There's a saying, revenge is a dish best served cold. I don't entirely agree, but there's wisdom in the idea that distance from the heat of the moment prevents rash decisions that could lead to self-harm. It offers all the satisfaction without the folly. On reflection, perhaps that's precisely its true meaning. While seeking resolution, our everyday life with Jill continued, undisturbed in the eyes of our children. We ensured our discussions remained out of their innocent reach. Our intimacy experienced a fleeting rekindling post that eventful breakfast, but soon reverted to its usual pattern, albeit somewhat lacking. Both Jill and I recognized this incompleteness. We couldn't ignore the underlying tension. Jill often initiated conversations about trying new things to mend the gap. Any desire you've harbored, anything I've not done before, just express it. I'm here to fulfill it, she offered. I sensed her effort to compensate, yet it felt off target. I yearned for a shared connection in our intimacy, not actions driven solely by one-sided satisfaction or obligation. Her readiness to fulfill any request didn't align with my deeper wishes. My long-held fantasy was a threesome, a thought predating my marriage to Jill, which remained unaltered. Confronting the fact that Jill had lived out this fantasy without me, with another pair, was unsettling. We discussed it multiple times. Jill showed openness to explore uncharted territories with me, yet each suggestion seemed to offer solace rather than genuine fulfillment. Jill, there's no quick fix for this situation, I expressed. Are you upset? She inquired. Yes, then express your frustration. Let it out on me. I was agitated, pacing around. Do you feel the need to vent your frustrations on me? Stop. I don't want to hear that term again. I apologize. I thought it might be something you'd want to explore. We've gone down that road before. Not with that label, but the act. It was intense, yet it's not who we are. It was something to experience, perhaps occasionally, but it doesn't define us. Labeling you doesn't sit well with me. It evokes the painful memories of discovering your secret with Paul and Susan. I don't want to revisit those emotions. Then let's be open. Forget about what I might prefer. Just share what you truly desire. What I really wanted was something adventurous and new in our relationship, something to break the monotony. Jill seemed eager to mend things, perhaps in a unique way. I tried to shake off my initial desires and focus on something fresh we hadn't explored. Eventually, an idea surfaced, not exactly a wild fantasy, but definitely uncharted territory for us. Well, I've never experienced being pampered while standing up, I mused, more as a thought than a request. I was curious to see how she would react. Her smile and swift action spoke volumes. She helped me loosen my clothing, demonstrating a readiness I hadn't seen before. This was a first for both of us, a novel experience in our shared history. Typically, Jill was slow and deliberate, but this time she was eager and unrestrained. Our usual quiet encounters transformed as she boldly expressed her desires, a departure from our norm that both surprised and excited me. She pushed the boundaries beyond what I had hinted at, making the experience more intense than anticipated. I had mixed feelings, wondering if she was just trying to please me or genuinely enjoying the moment. Yet, the physical connection was undeniable. She then asked if I had a preference for how to conclude, a question that caught me off guard since we had never really discussed such specifics. Deciding felt more significant than it should, but eventually, I made my choice. The moment passed quickly, and despite my internal debate, the experience was intensely satisfying. This encounter opened up new avenues for us, leading to more open and detailed discussions about our desires and boundaries. It seemed we were both eager to compensate for lost time, exploring and experimenting with newfound enthusiasm. Jill surprised me with her willingness to venture into unexplored territories, even suggesting things we had previously dismissed. It was a phase of rediscovery and experimentation, allowing us to express and fulfill hidden fantasies, although I soon realized that my appetite for novelty had its limits. There were some aspects of our relationship that stood out positively. I enjoyed the candid conversations that emerged, and I felt a newfound sense of assertiveness, navigating our interactions more spontaneously, shifting dynamics effortlessly. She was remarkably receptive to this change, embracing the spontaneity without hesitation. However, some aspects were too intense for me, leading us to find a middle ground. Our intimate life evolved, adopting a mix of mild and adventurous elements. I refrained from using disrespectful language, and our communication occasionally ventured into bolder territories, which we both found exhilarating at times. Our relationship entered a phase of renewed passion, reaching a level of intensity we hadn't experienced in a while. Yet, I occasionally pondered whether she was merely accommodating my desires, which troubled me. I had never questioned her sincerity before and felt compelled to discuss my concerns. Her response was genuine, expressing a desire for mutual satisfaction and open communication, hoping to avoid any misunderstanding. As we revitalized our intimacy, the idea of retribution lingered. I took the lead in devising plans, preferring to shield her from the process, although she consistently supported the idea. Her insistence on being involved made me realize that excluding her might seem like abandonment of the plan. Her enthusiasm grew, matching, if not surpassing, my own, adding an unexpected thrill to our discussions. Our conversations over wine sometimes turned to hypothetical retaliations, each suggestion more dramatic than the last, culminating in absurdly harsh scenarios. Realizing the extremity of our musings, we paused, laughed off the severity, and shifted focus, reminded of our shared fondness for gentler subjects. Much of my outburst was simply releasing frustration. We sought some form of retribution, yet without causing physical harm. Our true desire was for them to experience the emotional turmoil we endured, to disrupt their seemingly unaffected marital bliss while ours suffered a significant hit. I was not particularly affluent, intelligent, or well-connected. Immediate vengeance was not an option. However, I've mentioned my patience. The Grand Canyon wasn't sculpted in a day. I was concerned that my wife, despite her comforting words, might overlook our discussion. Fortunately, that fear was unfounded. She was as upset as I was, albeit for different reasons. Her upset stemmed from Susan and Paul's refusal to entertain a certain proposal involving me. It seemed she too felt a sense of betrayal. This is when having dependable friends became advantageous. One was a tech enthusiast with a knack for audio-visual equipment, and another was incredibly charming and charismatic. Then there was a friend of Jill's, an enigmatic figure, jobless but internet-savvy. Together, we hatched a plan, which required time to execute. Physical, financial, or public humiliation tactics were not my choice. I aimed for a strategy that would inflict emotional distress, mirroring my own pain. For Paul, it meant confronting his actions with Susan. As for Susan, once a friend of Jill's, her apologetic messages seemed sincere. Despite my anger, I recognized her loyalty to Paul. I wanted her to endure the sting of betrayal, echoing the agony my wife and I felt. Revisiting the friends who owed me favors, I had experienced disappointments but also had people eager to reciprocate the help I'd extended beyond mere financial aid. Now was the time to cash in those favors. Let's talk about Miriam, the charming friend. Susan was conventionally attractive, while Miriam had a less striking but still appealing appearance, with a charisma that was palpable. Her attire often hinted at more than it revealed, contrasting with Susan's subtle signals. Miriam managed a professional demeanor at work, yet her vivacious nature was undeniable. Her interactions were not flirtatious, but the warmth of her embrace once unintentionally stirred my emotions. At 25, Miriam felt indebted to me for securing her a position where she was valued for her capabilities, not just her appearance. Contrary to expectation, she was often underestimated professionally due to her attractiveness, a stereotype I helped her overcome without ulterior motives. She expressed gratitude in ways that suggested more intimate repayments, yet I hesitated, conflicted by the personal turmoil and the inappropriate nature of such offers. I summoned her to my office one day and just blurted it out. "Miriam, does your offer to help me still stand?" Miriam grinned. "Any place, anytime, any way. I need you to meet with a stranger and be filmed during the encounter." Miriam's expression shifted from intrigue to shocked. Despite my blunt approach, she quickly recovered. "Well, that's a surprise. Being on camera isn't really my thing. Plus, I prefer my company to be appealing. He's handsome, and it's not for a vulgar purpose. I just need to prove that he's unfaithful to his wife. They were involved with Jill and me, and I want to expose their deceit. The recording will only be shown to his wife, and your identity will be concealed." I was a bundle of nerves. From her expression, I could tell she needed more convincing. Miriam seemed caught between amusement, empathy, and the urge to leave. After a pause, she said, "Relax and explain everything to me." I shared the whole story, hesitantly at first, but Miriam quickly grasped the situation, making it easier for me to continue. By the end, Miriam was laughing, which made me feel terrible at first. Noticing my discomfort, she clarified, "Garrett, I'm not mocking your predicament. It's just amusing that you're still avoiding a personal moment with me. You're a decent man. I'll help you, just tell me what you need." I hadn't noticed my own anxiety until Miriam touched my forehead, joking, "I seem to really affect you." That eased my tension. Her playful attitude reassured me. So, I opened up about wanting evidence of Paul's betrayal towards Susan, yet feeling conflicted as it seemed like rewarding him with an irresistible encounter. Despite my efforts, Paul would still experience something I never could, especially after his intimate moment with my wife. Miriam was understanding and encouraging as I shared my mixed feelings. She reassured me, "You're going to be pleased with how things turn out." Then she gave me a quick, gentle kiss and stepped back before I could react. "Leave it to me." This is where Jill's acquaintance from online stepped in. He informed Miriam of Paul's routines, setting the stage for her to accidentally encounter him. Armed with this knowledge, Miriam managed to captivate Paul's attention, and swiftly, they ended up at her apartment. The timing of this was notable to me, as I was indirectly present at her place. Chris, my tech-savvy friend, had previously set up his equipment at Miriam's, ensuring everything that occurred was recorded with precision. His skills with audio-visual tech were impressive. The clarity and coverage were professional grade. I only listened to the audio. Jill hinted at watching the video, but I opted for sound only. I feared that seeing Miriam in a compromising situation would alter my perception of her. I was also reluctant to give Jill the impression of settling any score by viewing the video, entangled in my conflicted feelings. Skipping over the unremarkable parts of the audio, it became interesting when the conversation turned suggestive. The dialogue was charged with insinuations and provocations, leading to a crescendo of intense sounds, predominantly from Paul, culminating in his loud expression of climax. After a brief silence, I was left wondering about the unseen visuals. The quiet was shattered by Miriam's words, "Is that it? You left me unsatisfied. You didn't feel anything. How could I? Wasn't my silence obvious? But you just continued without a clue. Enough already. I've always been able to please others." "Really? Those others must be easily pleased or just flattering you. Are you just in a bad mood?" "Oh, charming as ever. Please, just go. You're impossible to please." I've never had complaints before. My wife, my partners, they all praise my touch, and there are many of them, some even with my wife's knowledge. That was the moment Jill knew Susan had always thought Paul only strayed with her consent. Whether Paul lied about his affairs in the moment was up for debate. The recording we had was meant for Susan's eyes only. An anonymous source sent it directly to Susan's inbox. Jill and I could only guess at the conversations that ensued, entertaining ourselves with speculative scenarios. I joke, "He's probably exiled to the sofa tonight. Only if he's fortunate. She might be considering divorce. Or perhaps she's getting even with his buddies. Or plotting to give him a taste of his own medicine with a health scare, something that makes him see the consequences." We reveled in our imagined dialogues, yet the actual outcome surpassed our wildest guesses. A few days later, Susan texted Jill, "I was mistaken. I'm open to that idea with you and Garrett, if it's still on the table. Sometimes a little nudge is all fate needs." Suddenly, my wild thought was a possibility again. The next phase was for the three of us to have a conversation. Once again, I had set some ground rules. One crucial rule was that Susan wouldn't disclose our little secret to Paul. I sensed she was eager for some personal vendetta, and I urged her to hold off on flaunting it to Paul. My plan was to keep him in the dark, replicating the oblivion I once felt. Susan agreed, expressing her willingness to postpone her gratification for a more impactful moment. She crafted her alibis meticulously, and soon, she was at our doorstep. Initiating anything seemed daunting, but I didn't need to worry. Susan and Jill shared a passionate embrace, their actions speaking volumes. I stood by, an observer to their unfolding intimacy. Witnessing Susan in such a vulnerable state was new to me, and admittedly, she was captivating. I joked to myself about holding on to that image, trying to lighten the mood internally. As the two of them continued, I was somewhat frozen in awe. Jill, noticing my hesitance, suggested I get more comfortable, hinting at shedding my attire. I complied, removing my clothes while still engrossed in their interaction. Jill's expression showed concern, while Susan seemed to be enjoying the scenario. Fully undressed, I became part of their dynamic, with Jill guiding the situation assertively. Jill's words were sharp, laced with vengeance, as she directed Susan in a way that was far from the sensual encounter I was led to expect. The tension in her tone was palpable, indicating her unresolved anger. Despite the harshness, the situation unfolded with Jill seemingly finding satisfaction in orchestrating the events. As the encounter progressed, I noticed a stark difference between Jill's and Susan's approaches, with Jill having a deeper understanding of my preferences. Yet, the novelty of the experience held its own allure. The climax of the moment was intense, leaving me both exhilarated and apprehensive about Jill's reaction. Fortunately, her gentle caresses post-climax reassured me. We eventually settled into a calm afterglow, with Susan and Jill appearing at ease. The atmosphere was new to me, almost like I was newly initiated into an exclusive circle. While we lounged, Susan's attempt to engage Jill was met with a stern reminder of boundaries, emphasizing the respect due to me in the situation. Susan appeared unfazed, her grin wide. She glanced my way and queried, "May I indulge with your wife?" That notion thrilled me. Temporarily sidelined, I consented, "Yes, I'd like you to indulge her." Observing Susan, she gently pressed her lips to Jill's. A lengthy, tender exchange ensued. Jill reciprocated enthusiastically. This encounter, seemingly orchestrated for me, transformed my outlook as I realized Jill genuinely relished the experience. My previous concerns dissipated, affirming her curiosity was genuine. As they momentarily paused, both Jill and Susan shared a glance with me, smiles all around. My attention remained fixed as Susan attentively explored Jill. I joined, sharing a kiss with Jill, captivated by the unfolding interaction. My physical readiness was irrelevant. I was fully immersed in their moment. Transitioning seamlessly, I continued where Susan left, particularly as she navigated further. Jill's expression preluded her climax. Encouragingly, I whispered, "Let go." Her response was profoundly intense, surpassing any prior moment we shared. Rather than envy, I was engrossed, now fully grasping what she had explained but I never fully comprehended. Post-climax, the gentle caress of Susan's fingers along Jill's frame was like watching an artist. I pondered my limited approach in the past. The moment was serene. I professed, "I love you." Gradually, Jill regained her composure, murmuring affectionately, "I love you too. So much. Kiss me." Our kiss was intimate, while Susan's actions remained unobtrusive. After our lips parted, Jill's silence and closed eyes spoke volumes. Susan exchanged a knowing smile and wink with me, patiently awaiting Jill's cue. Without words, Jill's actions conveyed her feelings, revitalizing me. Meanwhile, Susan and I shared a deep kiss, an intense connection forming as we were enveloped in the moment. The sensation was intoxicating, a testament to the complexity and depth of our shared experience. When I became excited, Jill paused. It took me a moment to notice because I was deeply engaged with Susan. My attention had not wavered from her. Glancing down at Jill, I caught her smile. "Go ahead, love," she encouraged. Paul had never been intimate with Jill, despite her insinuations that it might happen. Yet, it never did. This was a victory for me, a score I was silently keeping. I pondered Jill's reaction as I got closer to Susan, but there was no need for concern. Jill was there, gently holding Susan, facilitating our connection. Susan seemed indifferent to the dynamics, lost in the moment. Her warmth and response were undeniable, captivating me momentarily. Physically, the experience with Susan was satisfactory, yet it lacked the exceptional connection Jill and I shared over the years. It was the mental exhilaration that lingered far beyond the physical interaction. After the moment with Susan, the physical aspect faded. Following that, our interactions returned to normalcy, as if the past events had vanished. We conversed, laughed, and discussed various topics, all while in a state of undress, feeling a sense of relief from my previous turmoil. However, one task remained. United by a common disdain for Paul, we bonded over this newfound camaraderie. With just a few calls, Paul, Susan, Jill, and I reverted to our old dynamics, under the guise of moving past previous conflicts. Paul easily accepted this narrative. We hosted a gathering at our place, where past encounters with Susan and Jill had unfolded. To my surprise, everything proceeded harmoniously, dissolving any prior tension and recalling better times. Embracing Paul was particularly gratifying for me, as I now held the upper hand in our dynamic. His obliviousness added to the satisfaction as he reciprocated my hug, commenting on the restoration of our friendship. I agreed, suggesting a mutual forgiveness, insinuating a hypothetical reversal of roles. That embrace and exchange filled me with a sense of warmth, enhanced by the subsequent interactions. Now, possessing a secret, I engaged with Jill and Susan in Paul's presence, maintaining our usual demeanor yet conveying deeper, unspoken messages. This covert communication intensified with each passing moment, especially as we continued to socialize, making the experience increasingly enjoyable. Paul managed to get me alone while Jill and Susan were engrossed in catching up on old times. "Hey man, I'm so glad we're all back together," he said, draping his arm around me. I replied, "True friends are indeed rare. I've missed our bond. It feels like we've reclaimed it." Paul nodded. "Absolutely, there's something special about being with close friends." Since our reunion, Paul had never offered an apology, his demeanor still tinged with arrogance, something I found oddly satisfying. He seemed unaware that his secret was out. I agreed. "It's comforting, Paul, to be able to open up to close friends, knowing they can do the same. It's like sharing a part of ourselves, the best parts." I paused, adding, not to sound too philosophical. Paul was sharp. My hints, though subtle, were not lost on him, especially considering he had been in the same boat. I pressed further. "With strangers, I often feel uneasy, as if I need to put on a show. But with you and Susan, everything feels effortless and natural." I could have stopped there. Paul's gaze was fixed on me, his mind racing. With a grin, I continued, "You know, like pieces of a puzzle fitting perfectly." He paused, then laughed it off as if I had made a joke. "That's hilarious. I should probably go check on my wife," he said. He was aware of the innuendo, unsure only of its truth. Despite my own past experiences, I felt no sympathy for him. Rather, I reveled in the moment. As he turned to leave, I remarked, "Good idea. She's truly special, in every way." Paul quickly drew Susan away from Jill. The evening concluded with Paul and Susan departing in a huff. I could only speculate about their heated exchange. Susan had gleefully anticipated confronting Paul about the mysterious video she had received, as well as their shared secret. Jill and I had just tidied up and headed to bed. While I took care of the cleaning, Jill was noticeably tipsy. She offered to assist, but I reassured her that I had it under control. The evening had been delightful, and I was still basking in its warmth. That night, there was no intimacy, just the comforting presence of being beside someone you cherish. The following morning, we reflected on the previous night's events. Jill inquired, "Are we okay?" "Absolutely, we're more than okay," I assured her. "Did last night live up to your expectations?" "It surpassed them," I admitted. I was concerned it might not meet my hopes, given past experiences, but it was incredible. Jill's smile radiated happiness. "I'll ensure your next dream is even better. Have you thought of one yet?" I hesitated, searching for the right words. I didn't have another dream in mind and worried that might seem unenthusiastic. Then it dawned on me. My dream now is about us, just the two of us. Us. Yes, us. It's about prioritizing our relationship, discussing anything as long as it's about us. That's my focus. I don't need anything beyond that. If you desire more, we should talk about it first." Jill paused, her gaze fixed on mine, pondering my words. Then she spoke, "I don't desire anyone else, just you. I'm content with our reality." My comment. The best part for me was Jill's honest and clear-eyed conversational responses to her husband. It was great to hear and think about what a cheating wife might actually be thinking and feeling at that point. Not the usual crap from the standard caught cheater scenes.